don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you.
Tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods. What Canada is doing to respond.
This is just the beginning of a fight.
Survivors of the Île-à-Crosse residential school in Saskatchewan have signed a multi-million-dollar agreement in principle with the federal government.
I want to teach other people so they can have more skill sets, more life skills, and with that you get more confidence.
And we'll learn about an on-the-land event in Yellowknife that promotes physical and spiritual well-being. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. After weeks of threats, U.S. President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian goods Tuesday. The White House has imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods and a 10% one on energy and critical minerals. In Ottawa, leaders were quick to respond with how they will fight the tariffs. APTN's Fraser Needham starts us off tonight.
At a Tuesday morning press conference, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had this message for American people.
We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country.
To combat the Trump tariffs, Trudeau announced the government will be imposing counter tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, which will rise to $155 billion in 21 days. The Prime Minister had these words for Canadians.
I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help.
At a press conference immediately after Trudeau's, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said his party supports counter tariffs, but money collected by the government should not be used to increase spending.
Counter tariffs must not be a cash cow for the government. Almost every penny of the tariffs collected should go to tax cuts, with a small sum set aside for targeted relief to workers hardest hit by the trade war. None of the money should go to new government spending and programs. We must not allow politicians to dishonestly use this crisis to once again launch a debt-fueled, money-printing spending spree.
At another event down the road from Parliament, Indigenous leaders were at an unrelated press conference where they were asked about the Trump tariffs. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak called for Indigenous and non-Indigenous unity during these challenging times.
Look, we won't defeat Trump's colonialism with more colonialism in Canada. And I think that it's time that First Nations people take their rightful place in this country. And I think today needs to signal that. Any talk of annexing our country, well, we're here. First Nations have always been here. We'll continue to be here. And, Canada is on First Nations land.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Provincial leaders also held their own news conferences today. The Manitoba government is echoing the words of the federal government. In the process, they've put a giant Canadian flag over the steps of the legislature. Premier Wab Kinew says this is about showing solidarity, not just with the federal government, but other premiers and provinces. Also today, both Manitoba and Ontario began removing American alcohol off the shelves as one of its first moves of retaliation. Kinew and his government saying Manitoba is playing the long game when it comes to fighting back against President Donald Trump.
Thank you. So the leverage that we have as Canadians is our unity. It's looking at those natural resources. It's looking at energy. And it's using all of those tools in a smart fashion, which doesn't necessarily mean using them all on day one. We got to play the long game here as well. Using them in a smart fashion to exert that leverage and overcome this adversity. So first step is unity. First step is showing that we're willing to stick up for ourselves, and then just being able to play those cards in successive rounds to get the outcome that protects your jobs and protects your family.
The tariffs are also expected to make a significant dent in the resource sector. Joining us now is John Desjarlais, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Resource Network. John, appreciate you taking some time for us here today. The Indigenous Resource Network represents Indigenous peoples involved in the resource sector. How concerned are you about these tariffs?
Incredibly concerned, and I think for a lot of reasons. Of course, there's concerns in terms of the economic impact that these tariffs will have on the resource sector, but especially concerned as they relate to Indigenous people. As we know, a lot of the communities are in remote locations that don't necessarily have the market diversity, so a lot of them are reliant on these single industry sources. And so, whatever impact they have, they're going to have a considerable detrimental impact on these communities that count on them for livelihood and jobs and procurement and whatnot. Further to that, really concerned because a lot of the communities have arrangements or agreements which see resource revenue sharing, right? And so whatever impact they have to, these different industries, it's going to have that type of detrimental impact to these communities. Now we're seeing much more communities engaged in ownership. So not just kind of that follow through or cascading impact, but direct impact on, the revenues and profits that are generated from them. And Indigenous communities are continuing to make stride. And this is a potential major setback.
Right. Should this turn into a lengthy trade war, what types of supports would you like to see for those impacted?
I think there's again, diversification support for these communities to help kind of navigate that are very reliant on a lot of these single sources of income to be able to support their communities. Further development of, value chains of these markets to ensure, sovereignty and security of these different types of commodities. In the energy side, what does it look like, developing our resources and then exporting to other countries look like? On the commodity side, what does manufacturing and developing through a lot of these resources look like, and how do we include Indigenous communities in those conversations as well too? I think there's a lot of things we can do, but hopefully we don't have to engage in this too far. Hopefully, I think we'll realize there's a considerable economic impact on either side of the border, and come to some type of reasonable agreement. But in the interim, I think we need to think about kind of that sovereignty, the security, that Canada and the Indigenous people have, and then start to look at how do we diversify, how do we ensure we have stable trading partners going forward.
You and I were talking about forestry before this, one of the largest employers of Indigenous peoples in this country that's already been hit hard in recent decades. What do you think the impact could be there?
That's one where, the impact could be considerable. That's where you actually see Indigenous businesses engaged on the end side, on the product side, that are shipping products right to the U.S. So there's a direct impact on that, on those communities specifically. And forestry sector is a considerable employer of Indigenous people, again, in those remote and rural locations. And so impact on the industry. Indigenous people are industry through managing forests, through the harvesting, and then of course, the shipping of refined products and to different places, including the U.S. And so, it would be considerable. It would be painful.
There's been a lot of talk, I guess, on the longer term about resurrecting once canceled pipeline projects like Energy East and even Keystone XL. That's an interesting one. Are you supportive of moving energy projects once canceled, moving those forward, and other resource development projects out there on the books?
Absolutely. I think we are supportive because, we're built off of a network community that is supportive and want to explore that. It's an opportunity to revisit what went wrong and then look at them from a different perspective. I think in today's time, we look at energy projects much differently. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't look at kind of projects from a pure partnership perspective. How do we do this together? We do that much better now. We're seeing energy projects being developed in queue and in line with communities with strong support and consent around those. So we supporting those people those communities that want to engage in it. The discussion is ever more important now because as we talk about security and sovereignty, how do we diversify so we're not exporting a majority of resources to one trading partner, where we can diversify and export to a variety of trading partners. And again, that combined with the fact that Indigenous people are increasing at a great rate their equitable participation in these projects. I think it's a good time to re-explore these because Indigenous people will have a different position. We see communities as leverage, as strength in terms of developing projects, and we should revisit the viability of that and the risks and managing the risks around those. And I think we think about those things differently now, and we should put them back on the table.
John, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Dennis.
Well, despite a 10% tariff on Canadian energy, U.S. President Donald Trump recently spoke about resurrecting the Keystone XL pipeline, which would bring oil from northern Alberta to the Midwest U.S. On tonight's episode of Face to Face, Canadian Council for Indigenous Business CEO Tabitha Bull says it's a bit of a strange announcement.
I think it's very interesting that you would bring back that conversation while you're also going to tariff the commodity that's going to flow through that pipeline. So, as with a number of things that have come out from President Trump lately, it's difficult to understand the rationale and the thought on that. But, that conversation, and for our cousins and Indigenous people in the South right now, south of the border in the U.S., it's frightening, and because I really think that they're moving backwards in their respective rights, and I don't know that he's prepared for what the response will be.
And you can catch our entire interview with Tabitha Bull tonight, right here after the news. Well, we want to hear what you think about the tariffs or anything else you'd like to reach out about. Here's how to continue the conversation. If you have a story you would like to share, you can send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can also find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. A Sami politician is in Toronto for the annual Prospectors and Developers Conference to speak about a Canadian-led mining project in her homeland. That story and more still to come. Welcome back. After decades of fighting for compensation, survivors of the Île-à-Crosse residential school in northern Saskatchewan have signed a multi-million-dollar agreement in principle with the federal government. Survivors of the Île-à-Crosse residential boarding school were left out of the 2016 Indian residential school settlement agreement. Last Wednesday, Canada agreed to pay a $27.3 million settlement package. A formal announcement was made in Île-à-Crosse on Monday. The money will be divided between survivors and families of survivors who passed before 2003, based on the number of years at the school. $10 million will also be put aside for a legacy fund for language and cultural revitalization. The Catholic boarding school opened in the 1820s and operated in northwestern Saskatchewan for more than a century. Mostly Métis children were forced to attend.
This is just the beginning of a fight. We've won this battle, but we haven't quite won the war. So with this settlement with Canada, it's exciting. But we still have a lawsuit against the Saskatchewan government, and we will continue with that. And they need to come to the table.
You can read much more about this story on our website, aptnnews.ca. It's day 3 of the PDAC Mining Conference in Toronto, and while thousands of investors and executives continue to meet inside the Toronto Convention Centre, many in opposition continue to speak out from the outside. Sami leaders announced their opposition to Blue Moon Metals, a Canadian mining company that bought a controversial copper mining development project in northern Norway. According to the Sami, the proposed copper mine would threaten sacred reindeer herding grounds. Leading the delegation is Biaksa Nihilis, a member of the Sami parliament. Although it's still in the planning stages, he says the Sami have been fighting against the project for 20 years.
The Sami people and our people lives in Norway, Sweden, Finland and Russia. So we are colonized by 4 states at once. So that's why we're here, to inform the investors, to inform possible investors that this is a project that they shouldn't go through with because of the hazards both with nature but also with Indigenous people's rights and then especially reindeer herding, which is protected by human rights and Indigenous people's rights. It seems when we have been in dialogue with the Canadians before that they were not informed of all the trouble that mine will cause. So we are obligated to tell the possible shareholders and investors about the mess they are getting themselves into. So that's basically why we're here.
Closer to home, a Chinese-owned thermal coal mine was fined $9,000 last week by the Alberta Energy Regulator. The CST Canada coal mine near Grand Cache leaked 1.1 million litres of tailings into the nearby Smoky River in 2023. The regulator report indicated that the owners did not notify them until 7 hours after the leak was discovered. The mining company was fined $22,000 last December for a similar 2022 leak in that same river and delayed reporting it to the regulator. The Alberta Energy Regulator told APTN in an email that fines are limited by provincial guidelines. The NDP's former environmental critic for Alberta calls the $9,000 fine against the mining company a slap on the wrist and says it's not an effective deterrent. He would like to see increased fines for mining companies. Still to come here tonight, we'll take you to a Fishing for Wellness event in Yellowknife. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Rhonda Phillip shared the calm waters from the traditional territory of the Seal people located within the Seal Okanagan Nation. Thanks, Rhonda. Photos can be sent to share@aptn.ca to have the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +3 with snow in Fredericton, 7 in Halifax. -19 in Kuujjuaq, 14 below for Nain. +5 in Montreal, -5 with flurries in Chibougamau. -3 in Sault Ste. Marie, 5 above in Ottawa. 0 with snow in Thunder Bay, cloudy, and -5 in Sioux Lookout. -2 in God's Lake, flurries, and -3 in Norway House. 0 in Winnipeg and Dauphin, -4 in Barons River. 1 below in Regina, Estevan, and Saskatoon. 0 in Meadow Lake, -1 with snow in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -3 with snow in High Level, 9 below, and flurries in Fort Chippewa. +3 in Edmonton, 5 above in Lethbridge. 9 in Victoria, cloudy, and 12 in Kamloops. +5 in Prince George, cloudy, and 7 in Smithers. -9 in Old Crow, +3 in Whitehorse. -16 in Yellowknife, 8 below in Norman Wells. -20 in Sax Harbor and Paulatuck. 24 below in Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -26 in Resolute, 18 below in Igloolik. The Native Women's Association of the Northwest Territories organized Fishing for Wellness, a 2-day on-the-land event that promotes physical and spiritual well-being through traditional practices and teachings. Yellowknife video journalist Bruce De La Cruz has more on the story.
Over 100 people came to the Con Mine Wharf in Yellowknife for the last weekend of February to watch and participate in some on-the-land activities.
Especially when it's windy.
Clayton Bell, whose father is Cree and originally from Saskatchewan, led an ice fishing workshop in the ways that had been passed down through his family.
Use them out with your thumb and your index finger.
In the next tent over, a wolf and fox skinning workshop was led by Nathan Kogiak, a local Inuvialuit trapper with years of experience. Both men share their thoughts on the name of the event, Fishing for Wellness, and how being on the land can contribute to that.
I think being on the land is one of the best things that you can do for people, to get out and reconnect with nature. You know, especially around Yellowknife, when you get out of cell phone range so quickly, you're not so dependent on that phone in your hand.
For myself, like for a person's mental health, being out, being physical, chiseling through that ice, you're burning off energy. You know, you're dragging the nets. It's good work. So you know, that's going to help with your mental health, your overall physical well-being. So it's great. I enjoy it. I think it's helpful for everybody, and the more people you have helping, the better.
In addition to wellness, they also explain why they think it's important to keep the practices of their people alive and pass them on to the next generation.
For me, the youth are our future, so to teach them these skills, to be able to have the ability to take care of themselves in the future is really important. So for them to get in there, and they seemed to be the most engaged in this program. They got in there, they were cleaning the fish, getting their hands dirty, and smiling the whole time they're doing it, which is pretty cool. So for me to be able to teach them and give them that exposure is what this is all about.
So it would be really unfortunate to lose that, you know, with me. You know, that's why all this information I have, I want to teach other people so they can have more skill sets, more life skills, and with that you get more confidence, and with more confidence you get higher self-esteem. You feel better about yourself.
Nathan shared the one thing that he wanted people to take away from the event:
empathy and understanding. There's a lot of cultures in Yellowknife, and you have to be really open to those cultures to understand the people and their cultures. So if you're open-minded, I think that's probably the main thing, is just being aware that there's more than just one culture out here.
Bruce de la Cruz, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Cool shot. Thanks for that, Bruce. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with your first look at the day's ever-changing news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Face to Face is up next with our guest, Tabitha Wool. Have a great night.